gave you the thumbs up.
I know. I hit my. Then.
I'm putting it up on YouTube right now.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Janine.
All right, you're good to go.
Welcome, everybody. This is a joint meeting of the Chelsea Land Use and Clinton Hills Kitchen Land Use Committee meetings. Manhattan Community Board 4 has adopted a hybrid meeting policy whereby we will meet both in person and virtually. All community board members are required to be in person to reach quorum and to come to order and conduct business. Board members are expected to attend meetings in person unless they have a disability or an extraordinary circumstance as defined by the New York State Open Meetings Law. Excused committee members and members of the public will still be able to participate virtually. Committee members who are joining via Zoom must leave their cameras on. We encourage members of the public to join virtually. The Manhattan Community Board 4 hybrid policy can be found on our website. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and currently live streaming on YouTube. That's the disclaimer. For tonight, the reason we're doing a joint committee meeting of the two land use committees is that we have a City of Yes zoning text amendment proposal. The way we have done these in the past is both land use committees have joined together and making the statements about it. So tonight we'll hear from some representatives from the Department of Planning. My suspicion is that we aren't going to be able to make a motion tonight to take a position. We have until January to submit comments. So unless their presentation is smooth as silk and everybody on the committee says, yes, let's support this decision, I suspect we're going to have a list of questions we'll ask. We'll submit a letter with the questions, we'll get the responses, and then at next month's meetings of the land use committees, we'll have a draft letter that can then be reviewed and put forward at the following full board meeting so that it's submitted by January. Does that sound right? All right, so I'd like to start with introduction of the committee members. First, let's start with the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee members who are here. We're recognizing J.D. Nolan as co-chair. J.D.
I'm Mark Halzerbeck, committee member.
Sanford Miller, committee member.
Sandra Arena.
And from Chelsea Land Use, we have with us Carrie Keenan as co-chair is on Zoom.
I believe Jessica Chadas.
And Jessica Chade is not here yet. She's in traffic and she said she's going to be late.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, she's on.
And I'm on Zoom. I'm just also on the bus. Hi everyone. I'm so sorry I got stuck
sorry, Jess.
in transportation. Not at all. I don't have my camera on because you don't want to see the bus, but I'll see you all soon.
All right. And I don't see the I don't see the public. I don't see the list of the attendees. I apologize. Carrie?
Oh, hi, everyone. Yep, I'm Carrie from co-chair of Chelsea Land Use. And there are a number of Chelsea Land Use committee members on Zoom, and I cannot really see the room. So I think I saw David, but.
I'm David Holoka, Chelsea Land Use.
Greg Morris, Chelsea Land.
Hi, Rodney Washington, Chelsea Land Use.
And I see some committee members watching us on Zoom. So Pam is waving, Brian is waving, Marty is not waving.
Greetings, Marty Dickhat. I'm not with you.
Pamela Wolf. I am with
Hi,
you.
this is Varan Brambhat.
Hey, it's
Oh, hey, Varan. I didn't see you. Okay.
Hey, it's Brian Weber, Chelsea Health Kitchen Land Use with you virtually and in spirit.
I see Mike Noble just joined.
Hi, Mike Noble, Chelsea Land Use.
Great. Hey, Mike. So I'm going to turn this over to DCP now. We have Abby Ryder, Andy Cantu, and Jennifer Gravel with us. As always, we ask for presentations to be made. Committee members can then ask follow-up questions. If we have any people from the public who are zoomed in, we can call on them questions, and then the committees can discuss what position we take after that. So Andy, Abby, and Jennifer, turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm going to say hello on behalf of my colleagues here. I'm Abby Ryder, and with me I have Andy Cantu and Jen Gravel as well. And I'm going to share my screen if that's all right as we get started. All right, can everyone see my screen now? Thumbs up. All right, thanks,
If the
Martin.
room can see it, can people on Zoom see it?
We can see it.
Great.
Yes, I see it.
Terrific. Let me just make sure I have everything set on my end. All right. So I want to say a big thank you to both the Chelsea and Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use committees for hosting a combined meeting this evening for us so that we can present to everyone here on the City of Yes for economic opportunity at the same time. And I want to say thank you to you all who are here for taking the time to hear about this proposal and discuss next steps. Again, my name is Abby Ryder. I'm the borough planner covering CD4 at the New York City Department of City Planning. And since this proposal has many different facets with 18 different proposals included, my presentation is about 40 minutes long and we'll still leave time at the end for your questions. So as you've hopefully heard by now, City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is one of 3 citywide initiatives to modernize and update our city's zoning regulations to support small businesses, create affordable housing, and promote sustainability, part of Mayor Adams's vision for a more inclusive, equitable City of Yes. City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is the second in a series of citywide reforms to our zoning resolution. The other 2 proposals are City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, and I want to thank CB4 for your thoughtful review and detailed recommendations. This is currently in public review. This initiative is designed to help New York City meet its ambitious goal of reducing carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 by updating its zoning to make it easier to green our buildings, our streets, and our city. City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, an inclusive citywide approach to our city's housing crisis that aims to expand and diversify the housing supply and ensure that every neighborhood does its part to help meet housing needs and provide equitable access to housing for all New Yorkers. This proposal is expected to start public review next spring. The City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is designed to grow jobs and small businesses with a flexible approach to zoning. Here's an overview of the process to come. After more than a year of getting in front of as many audiences as we can, presenting our ideas for solutions to the problems businesses are facing today, and soliciting your feedback and questions about these proposals, we are in the process of going before every community board in the formal public review. This process will culminate in a city council vote sometime next spring. Before we dive into the proposal itself, I know many people on this board are very knowledgeable about zoning in New York City, but in the interest of making sure that we're all working from the same baseline information, I think it's helpful to go over what zoning governs when it comes to businesses here in New York. Zoning defines hundreds of what are called uses or business types and sorts them by zoning district and regulates things like what kinds of business activities you can do in your space and how big you can be. And because in many cases, the way that zoning regulates businesses hasn't been updated in more than 60 years, there are outdated and sometimes counterproductive regulations on business activity, like preventing a bar from advertising the time a band might perform, or setting a strict square footage cap on how much space a bakery can devote to baking. Knowing that our zoning for businesses was in need of a refresh, we've been on a listening tour for much of the last year and a half, asking small business owners, chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, industrial service providers, and other stakeholders about the city or across the city about the ways that zoning might be getting in the way of establishing or expanding businesses. We've met with over 100 groups, had 5 public information sessions, and which I think some of you have attended and are available on our DCP YouTube page. And we've also heard from countless New Yorkers about the challenges that you face, and this proposal has been shaped by your concerns. A lot of what we heard is, let's face it, New York City can be a challenging place to run a business, and dealing with government regulation is frustrating, slow, confusing, or seemingly illogical. And often all of this red tape makes investing in businesses hard. And that in turn contributes to our city feeling less vibrant, having fewer people able to start that business, having one more vacant storefront, having one more business that have to leave their neighborhood or the city overall to expand. Our rules governing businesses, which are more than 60 years old, are holding our businesses back by either restricting them outright from locating or regulating how they do their business with some sort of old or complicated rule that's not just being clear in the way that costs businesses time and money. Our overarching vision for this initiative is to make sure that zoning works for our economy and not against it. And as a result, of this work, to have a zoning resolution that is more simple, more adaptable, and more modern. Now, these are citywide proposals to change our zoning, and they apply to all 5 boroughs and all 59 community districts throughout our city. So what does this mean for CD4? Here's a snapshot of the economy. As of this year, using figures from New York State Department of Labor, CD4 has 195,000 jobs spread across a range of sectors in this economy. Using information from LiveXYZ, a data services company that provides information to the city, the district also has approximately 3,000 storefronts with a wide range of business types occupying those spaces. About 470 of those storefronts are vacant, a rate that is ever so slightly lower in Manhattan and higher in the city overall. These proposed zoning changes would make it easier to fill empty storefront space by giving businesses more certainty on where they can locate, what they can do with their space, and by removing outdated zoning restrictions on businesses from using that storefront space. So how do we achieve zoning that works for the business community in Community District 4 and New York City as a whole? First, we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow. The main way we propose to do this is by lifting zoning barriers so businesses can be closer to their customers. Second, we want to support growing industries by reducing obstacles for emerging business types, which can help emerging businesses thrive across the city and create jobs. Third, we want to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. Fourth, and finally, we want to create new opportunities for businesses to open in the future by creating new kinds of zoning tools that can boost job growth and business expansion in all 5 boroughs. With all of that said, I'll now get into each of the 18 proposals we have to change zoning to meet our goals. This is a lot of information here, including many maps showing how the proposals will interact directly with CD4. Please note that I will share a copy of this presentation with Jesse after the meeting, who can share it with all of you for further review. All right, goal 1. So we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow by lifting zoning barriers so that businesses can locate closer to their customers. In most cases, our zoning rules governing businesses have not been updated since the early 1960s, and it's long past due to update our zoning to reflect and respond to today's economy. Our first 6 proposals do exactly that, making our zoning more simple, more adaptable, and more modern so businesses can more easily locate and grow. Today, storefronts that are deemed non-conforming face arbitrary 2-year time clocks for reactivation, or else they have to remain vacant in certain zoning districts, including R1 through R4 and R8 through R10 and historic districts, which is a direct contributor to vacancy in our city. We are proposing to remove that time clock so vacant storefronts can be reoccupied. On this map, you can see where in CD4 this proposal would apply. In many places in the city, sorry, I should say this is proposal 2, which is to simplify district types. And here we have similar zoning districts that are located in the same corridor or on opposite sides of the street, and yet allow for different kinds of businesses, an outdated and confusing set of rules that routinely holds back business location or expansion. We are proposing here to simplify the differences between similar kinds of zoning districts to make it easier for businesses to know where they can locate. As part of Proposal 2, we are also removing restrictions on certain uses in C4 and C5 districts from locating on the ground floor. Proposal 3 is to enable more small-scale production. Despite changes in technology and a vastly different economy, our city's zoning rules are stuck in the 1960s with how they treat many kinds of maker businesses. Currently, commercial districts permit a limited range of production uses, some of which are obsolete, but exclude many kinds of production that are appropriate to locate in storefront or office settings. The issue here is that maker businesses that rely on retail foot traffic or prefer to locate near customers are only permitted in less accessible industrial areas. We want to allow small scale clean production like a pottery studio, bakery, coffee roaster, jewelry maker, apparel designer, 3D printer, and things like that to locate in commercial districts for the first time instead of only being allowed in manufacturing districts. These uses will be subject to relevant environmental standards to ensure that they're appropriate to locate near new businesses, or sorry, near residences and other businesses. Proposal 4 involves no more unnecessary loading docks. If one of the clean production businesses in the last proposal wanted to move into an empty office building, today they would face rules that would require them to add additional loading docks, even if they don't need them, and even if the building can't physically accommodate them. The proposal here is to remove the mandate for new tenants in existing buildings to provide additional loading berths based on a change in use. This would allow for older commercial buildings to change over time by not mandating a business tear them apart tear apart the ground floor of a building to provide new loading docks. Proposal 5 is allow commercial on upper floors. Today, zoning allows for many buildings to have a mix of residential and commercial uses, but apart from some special purpose districts in MX districts and other areas, zoning sometimes restricts businesses from being able to use upper floors. This limits options for new buildings to be built that contain both residences and businesses, or for older buildings to adapt over time. There are 2 parts to this proposal. One is to allow commercial uses on the second floor of a residential building in all commercial districts. The second part is to permit commercial above or on the same level as residences in C4, C5, and C6 districts. Note that complete separation between uses is maintained. And proposal 6 is to modernize use terms. Right now, our zoning hasn't updated the terms it uses to classify businesses in more than 60 years, and it's full of antiquated terms like shoddy manufacturing and typewriter repair. The issue is that it's difficult for newer business types like cell phone repair shops to know where they can locate. In this case, we're proposing to simplify and modernize the terms we use in zoning to classify businesses, using updated terminology based on today's economy, and update special district rules to refer to these new classifications. All right on to our second goal. We want to support growing industries by reducing obstacles in zoning for emerging business types. Each of the industries highlighted in the second goal, urban agriculture, life sciences, nightlife, amusements, and home-based businesses, faces ambiguity or outdated restrictions in our zoning, and we want to address those obstacles so that we can help emerging businesses thrive across our city and create jobs across all 5 boroughs. Currently, while agriculture is allowed outside or in a greenhouse in any zoning district, indoor agriculture is only allowed in M districts, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Businesses that want to operate indoor agriculture facilities, such as vertical farming within commercial areas, face uncertainty with today's zoning rules. In the proposal here, we would clarify how enclosure rules work to ensure that businesses with passive outdoor spaces, such as florists, can operate, and clarify that indoor agriculture is allowed in C districts so more food can be grown closer to communities. Proposal 8 is around life sciences. Currently, life science laboratories face confusing and outdated rules that slow the development of new facilities, including outdated terms to define a laboratory. The issue here is that the ambiguity in zoning can make building new labs difficult, including restricting where an existing special permit to allow commercial labs can often be restricted so that it can't be used near important research centers. In the proposal here, we would make it clear that labs without potential for environmental hazard are appropriate in office spaces. And we'd also expand where existing special permits where the existing special permit can be used so that labs might be able to locate in the future closer to research centers like hospitals and universities. All right, proposal 9, nightlife. Right now, restaurants and bars face confusing regulations on whether they can host concerts, dancing, comedy shows, or open mic nights. For example, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us that you can't have a 50-seat comedy venue in a particular location, but you can have a 200-person live music venue if it doesn't advertise its showtimes. We're simplifying the rules so they're based on the size of the venue rather than the activity, so that you only see small venues in neighborhood commercial corridors and larger venues in denser areas. To illustrate the current zoning in a little more detail, today, a restaurant or bar is allowed to have live music in any commercial district, whether that live music takes the form of background dinner accompaniment or a full band with amplified sound. But in some places, that same restaurant might be prohibited from having the band charge a cover or advertise its showtime, or from hosting other forms of live entertainment, such as comedy or open mic nights. Furthermore, it is still illegal in certain areas under zoning to dance in a bar, club, or restaurant, even though the City Council repealed the cabaret law several years ago. New York City has a long history of discriminatory practices regarding nightlife, and our zoning is a relic of this past in how it continues to restrict ticketed music, comedy, and dancing in many locations. Our proposal aims to clarify when a bar or restaurant can host dancing or other forms of entertainment with posted showtimes or cover charges by regulating businesses based on capacity, not activity. This means that live comedy, DJs, dancing, and ticketed events would now be treated the same under zoning, but venues would have their occupancy limited to 200 people, roughly the size of a regular storefront, when locating in neighborhood commercial districts and commercial overlays. Bigger venues would be limited to central business districts and the city's industrial areas. Now, we know that sometimes bars and restaurants can create concerns in the community, so we want you to know that we've been working closely with our colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and other city agencies to protect quality of life for New Yorkers. DOB and the FDNY rules around occupancy and safety, DEP regulations for amplified sound, and community board stipulations during the liquor licensing process all help to ensure that venues are being good neighbors. And programs like MEND NYC can step in to mediate any lingering issues that might arise between nightlife venues and community members. It's long past due to repeal the cabaret law, and this proposal finishes the job while keeping nightlife venues small in neighborhood settings. Proposal 10 focuses on amusements. Zoning currently has outdated terms for defining experiential amusement businesses like virtual reality or children's arcades, and often restricts these kinds of businesses to Coney Island or the city's industrial areas. Here, we would simplify and modernize how zoning treats amusements and recreational activities to make clear that these businesses are allowed indoors and at a small scale on a neighborhood street and at a larger scale in office districts. Proposal 11 centers on home occupations. Here, many New Yorkers start their businesses in their home, and zoning allows for a wide range of home business types, including lawyers, jewelry makers, and music teachers. The issue today is that you could be a lawyer or a music teacher regularly have clients visit your homes, but you couldn't be a barber or an interior designer. The pandemic changed how New Yorkers work from home, and it's time for zoning to keep up and make sure it's not holding back business creation. We are proposing to enable entrepreneurship with modern rules for home-based businesses by removing the list of currently prohibited business types, expand the size allowance from 25% to 49% of home, and allow for up to 3 employees to be associated with the home-based business. At the same time, we'd keep in place safeguards like noise and environmental rules and signage and retail limits to ensure that any home-based businesses are being good neighbors. All right, we're already at goal 3 of 4. Thanks for hanging in here. Let's get to the next one. Our third goal is to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. Economic vibrancy isn't just about what occurs inside a building, but also how a business interacts with its surroundings. Inconsistency in existing streetscape regulations, or in some cases, a total absence of zoning rules, means that there's no way to curb the worst outcomes of a business activity spilling out into the public right of way, or creating conditions that are unpleasant or even unsafe for passing pedestrians and cyclists. Our 3 proposals in this goal are designed to ensure that businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. Proposal 12 is all about promoting better ground floor designs. Right now, outside of Manhattan and in some special districts, most areas of the city do not have any zoning rules guiding street level design. This can lead to streetscape conditions like long blank walls and drive-through that break up retail streets and can create unpleasant and sometimes unsafe conditions for people walking past. But in vast parts of the city, there are no rules whatsoever to prevent new buildings that make these conditions worse. We're proposing to create a consistent and easy to understand baseline set of rules for commercial ground floor design, ones that are more responsive in areas with greater pedestrian activity, more relaxed in the city's more auto-oriented corridors. What I want to emphasize here is that Clinton, Hudson Yards, and West Chelsea were used as examples when developing these streetscape rules because they are more stringent than what's applied in other areas. This new streetscape framework has 3 tiers, which are cumulative and would apply to new construction buildings, but also when a significant alteration requires DOB sign-off. In most areas zoned as a commercial district or in light industrial districts where residents are allowed, blank walls in excess of 50 feet would require some kind of mitigation, whether that's a mural, a planting, or ideally some form of transparency. Parking would have to locate to the side or rear of a zoning lot where feasible, and new drive-throughs would have to go through a discretionary process at the BSA to ensure that they don't lead to unsafe conditions for pedestrians. Inside the transit zone, there are 3 conditions, or the 3 conditions of Tier A apply, but so would additional considerations, such as ensuring that storefronts maintain a minimum 50% transparency. Tier C consists of special purpose districts as well as other designated geographies in the zoning resolution. In these places, all of the regulations of tiers A and B would apply, and unique elements of each special district would be retained, enhancing the design of these unique geographies while rectifying inconsistencies that make it harder for businesses to know the rules. This new framework is designed to be simple, flexible, and in most places only intervenes to prevent the worst instances of building design that diminishes the economic vibrancy of a street. So here you can see how this streetscape framework would apply in CD4. Largely, you can see within the special purpose districts. I'll just give a few notes on some of the special permit districts here. I'm sure folks have questions, but we'll just go briefly through it. The Clinton district already has some special use regulations, and the proposal would maintain these site-specific permissions. In West Chelsea, there already are special ground floor streetscape regulations along 10th Avenue and use rules in the district. The proposal would maintain the special use rules that apply in various areas of the district. And along 10th Ave, the proposal would apply the new comprehensive suite of ground floor streetscape requirements. And in Hudson Yards, there are already a lot of special ground floor streetscape regulations on designated streets, as well as special ground floor regulations in Subdistrict F. The proposal would maintain the special use rules that apply in various areas of the district. Additionally, the special use location provisions would be removed, as they would be superseded by changes to the underlying zoning district. Along 10th Avenue, the proposal would apply the new comprehensive suite of ground floor streetscape requirements. And again, this framework would ensure active frontages while allowing for a wide and consistent use of range of uses to occupy the ground floor spaces. All right, so for Proposal 13, it's all about reducing conflicts with auto repair. Today, auto servicing and repair businesses are typically treated as industrial businesses and located far from retail streets and residential neighborhoods. But some exceptions exist that allows auto repair and storage activities to spill out onto the sidewalk and neighborhood commercial streets, creating safety concerns for pedestrians. What we're proposing is to rationalize and consolidate the range of auto servicing uses in zoning into two categories: light and heavy vehicle repair and maintenance. Heavy vehicle maintenance must be licensed by the state DMV and would continue to be allowed in industrial areas, while light vehicle repair could locate elsewhere after appealing to the Board of Standards and Appeals. All right. Proposal 14, enable micro distribution. Zoning does not allow for delivery activity within buildings except in industrial areas, forcing activity to occur on the sidewalks and streets. Here, we're proposing to create a new type of use in zoning called a micro distribution facility, and allow these businesses to locate in a small scale in commercial areas, encouraging deliveries to shift to alternative modes of transportation and regulating the creation of local hubs for safe and sustainable deliveries to occur. Basically, right now, the rules incentivize large distribution hubs that need, therefore, larger trucks to get all of their materials distributed. And this would allow for smaller facilities that hopefully would then encourage smaller vehicles and bikes to pick up where that distribution left off. Our fourth and final goal is to create new opportunities for businesses to open by establishing new zoning tools that can boost job growth and business expansion. Our zoning resolution contains many kinds of tools which can be used to initiate a discretionary process to change in areas underlying regulations, including special permits from the Board of Standards and Appeals, City Planning Commission authorizations and special permits, and zoning districts. As we're seeking to modernize our city's zoning to support business location and growth, we also need to update our zoning toolkit so that businesses can have better access to pathways that enable their expansion or adaptation. Our last four proposals all create new kinds of discretionary zoning tools for the future economic success of our city. Proposal 15 is campus commercial. Right now, many large-scale residential developments, such as NYCHA campuses, are zoned as residence districts, meaning that retail, services, and maker spaces cannot easily locate, and placing residents of those developments farther away from local goods and services. Here we're proposing to create a CPC authorization to allow up to 15,000 square feet of commercial space in existing or new construction on a large-scale residential campus, giving residents greater access to basic necessities or the space to grow a new business. Proposal 16 involves corner stores. Today, some portions of New York City are not within walking distance of a local retail store, like a bodega, and zoning has no pathways to potentially allow a new locally serving business to open. In this proposal, we're creating a discretionary pathway where a business could initiate a process to locate a new corner store, provided that the store does not generate any environmental concerns or traffic congestion. Proposal 17, this one is all about adapting spaces for industries like film. Today, in some instances, businesses lack options for waiving certain non-FAR related zoning rules. For instance, film studios often struggle to build sound stages because of certain zoning rules like yard requirements and setback heights. Or a clothing store might want to expand to occupy an empty second floor, but find that size limitations or location rules prevent them from doing so. Here, we're expanding the zoning toolkit to allow businesses to initiate a process to waive some zoning rules on a case-by-case basis. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a discretionary action. All right, we're at the final proposal. Proposal 18 is all about new loft size style zoning districts. In some cases, it's our zoning districts, not discretionary. It's our zoning districts, not discretionary pathways to modify them that are obsolete. This is particularly true of our city's manufacturing or M district zoning designations. Currently, low density options, physical design rules, and parking make it impossible to build loft-like buildings, even in areas where they already exist. This proposal will create a range of new job-intensive zoning districts at a range of densities and heights that expand the zoning toolkit for future rezonings. So we've made it through all 18 proposals, and I really appreciate you all sticking with me so far. I know that was a lot of information. The most important thing we want to take away from this is that this set of proposals is targeted at streamlining and modernizing zoning here in the city so that CD4 and every other district is able to grow jobs and small businesses. To help put all of these proposals in more context for CD4, I'm going to quickly run through a few maps of the district that show you which of the proposals apply to which zoning districts. Again, I'm going to share a copy of this presentation with Jesse so that you have full access to all of this information as you continue to review the proposals. So here we have the first CD4 applicability map showing C1 districts. And again, this will be available for you to peruse, but you can see on the left-hand side, we have a list showing the proposal number and description of that proposal summarized, and then on the right, where that would occur. Next, we have C2. You'll also see C4 here. And then you'll notice we skipped right to C6, and that's because in CD4, there's only one teeny tiny part of the district that contains a C5 district, and that is Columbus Circle. So it is in the appendix. You will also have access to the C5 list of proposals and where they're located on the map, but we hit it in the appendix just because it's maybe not as useful for most of your review for this district. Here we have R districts, residence districts. And then you can see M districts, again, mostly along the west side of the district for CD4. You'll also see the applicability map for special districts. And finally, you can see sort of how or which proposals sort of apply to all of the districts, especially these modernized use and simplified modernized use terms, you know, where discretionary actions might be located, and new types of commercial and zoning districts that would be available in the zoning toolkit. All right, coming into the home stretch here, in addition to a copy of this presentation, I highly encourage you to check out the City of Yes for Economic Opportunities website, which has links to all of the detailed and high-level information you could imagine on this proposal. You'll find everything from high-level explainers as well as the proposed zoning text with annotations and links to all of the previous presentation recordings and accompanying slide decks. You'll also find letters of support from a wide range of organizations and businesses. How to provide feedback. I know this community board is extremely well versed in how to share feedback in the public review process. I just want to highlight one resource for you, which is that because there's so many distinct proposals here, the Economic Opportunity team has created an optional worksheet for community boards to fill out, which allows you to indicate on each of the 18 proposals which ones you support or not, and a space to write requested modifications, if any. Again, this is optional, but it is available in case CB4 would like to fill it out and have Jesse submit via the land use participant portal online when you submit your recommendations. I'll close by sharing this same roadmap again for the process to come. After more than a year of getting in front of as many audiences as we can, we're ready and in the phase now of going before every community board, including yours, in the formal public review. Since this is a non-ULURP application, the CPC will accept feedback past the standard 60-day review clock, which will end at the beginning of January. But we highly encourage you to submit your recommendations as soon as possible for the greatest impact. This process will culminate in a City Council vote sometime next spring. And with that, thanks again so much for your time. And Andy, Jen, and I will welcome any questions you might have now. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Abby. That was a lot. And as you know, Abby, you are familiar with our board. You know that we will have lots to say. So we'll take
Absolutely.
So we'll go around the room. Jesse, is there a lot of people in the public attendance list? I don't see the list. Okay. So what I suggest we do is just go around the room and have people ask questions. Start up here. Teddy, as a small business owner, do you have any questions?
I just was wondering what ideas that you guys were going to have in terms of the cabaret laws for bars and restaurants. You know, that was lifted in the zoning areas. Depending on that, what is the guidelines going to look like for that? Determining what zones are there, the amount of people that can dance.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question, or maybe Jen, I saw you came off mic.
Go ahead, Abby.
Sure. So the question is where the repeal
I
of
would-
cabaret laws will.
Yeah, I mean, cabaret law was repealed, and no, the zoning is the only thing that's left behind. Keeping it back. So what's going to determine, some of the rules and regulations for the amount of people dancing, or things like that.
Yeah. Do you want me to take that one, Abby? Sure. Yeah. So you're right. The cabaret law was appealed a few years ago, but there were still restrictions specifically on dancing and zoning. It's sort of unusual for zoning to regulate like dancing, that activity. So this proposal would remove the limitation on dancing from eating and drinking establishments that exist in many parts of the city. But we would retain the existing capacity limitations that exist for eating and drinking establishments in the local commercial streets on C1 and C2 districts. There are also some rules that were sort of inconsistent and not entirely straightforward about on local commercial streets and smaller establishments, where you could do something like have a comedy club or have hosted entertainment. We think that as long as the activity is permitted, that we are regulating the size, that those things should be allowed. So the new proposal is really about removing restrictions on those kinds of activities and really letting the occupancy dictate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I had two more things. I was curious about how the vertical farming with plants would be with the legalization of marijuana, and people would be able to grow. So if I'm living in an apartment and someone's growing marijuana next door and it has such a pungent smell, would that be something that you guys would be taking into factor when determining grow what?
Yes, so the state would license the growing licenses for marijuana. We wouldn't, the zoning is agnostic to what kinds of plants you are growing. So yes, I think I think that would be entirely regulated by the state under the state licensing process.
You know how well that's worked out so far.
Yeah. Well, I know that, yes, I know that it's been sort of a bumpy rollout.
Bumpy's
polite. To say that, yeah. It is unfortunately not our jurisdiction to actually regulate marijuana.
No, but you're removing the protections that keep things like that from happening.
I think, one of the things we want to talk to you about just is that Joe, with all due respect, can we go around? Just sort of say up front, it's unintended consequences. As we go around the room. Let's, right? Yeah.
Nothing yet. Might think something later. Second person.
I won't stand.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. It was very clear and informative for the amount of things you covered. I guess what I find, and I will use the word shocking, is the way I feel a lot of this has ignored the protections in zoning for residential life, which to me, many of these proposals are just running roughshod over. Things like the way you're combining commercial and residential uses in one building. I'm the co-chair of our liquor license committee, and I want to focus on what I think is some major problems you're creating. Putting eating and drinking establishments in the same use group as other retail businesses is a huge mistake. And you can ask anyone who has lived next to a pharmacy that became a bar or a restaurant whether those are the same uses, and the answer will be uniformly no. The hours are different, the noise levels are different, the levels of disruption are different. They have to remain in a separate use group. And the way your rules interact make it worse, because in the proposals at the end, we're talking about allowing small businesses into residential areas. You talk about things like bodegas and pharmacies. But if bars and restaurants are in the same use group, you can end up with a 200-person bar in the middle of a housing development. So you got to think about the way those things interact. And similarly, a lot of your references to things being antiquated just, I think, show an ignorance of the way places operate. For example, just one small thing, the timing, prohibiting advertising ticketed shows in bars and restaurants actually is an important protection for residents, because when a bar or restaurant has a ticketed show, you end up with hundreds of people waiting on the sidewalk, hundreds of people leaving at the same time, and it's just a much greater disruption to residential life. So I'd urge you really to take into account what a lot of your changes, and not just in the eating and drinking area, but what a lot of these changes are doing to residential life protections. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I'm an architect, and the idea of mixing, say, manufacturing, even light manufacturing in a residential building raises a lot of questions. I don't know if you've had any interaction with the Department of Buildings on this, but, you know, residential construction requires a certain live load, a certain structural capacity of the floors for residential use. If you put manufacturing in, even light manufacturing, that may add load beyond that live load. You might also have a requirement for higher fire separation involved with manufacturing. I think a lot of the uses you're talking about, even things like kilns or jewelry making, they involve heat. Yeah, things that could create hazards. Even 3D printing produces toxic fumes, which you wouldn't want in a residential building. It seems really odd to me. Like, we're kind of going backwards. The most famous piece of zoning in New York history was the 1960 zoning resolution, which actually forbade garment making in residential buildings because it was considered unsafe and unsanitary. It feels like we're kind of taking a step backwards, and I just think that a lot more homework needs to be done on this idea of integrating manufacturing in residential. You talk about sound attenuation. Well, you know, who's to be the judge of what's an appropriate level of sound? And a lot of sound transmission is borne by the structure. It can carry through a building regardless of the amount of acoustic separation we try to introduce. I think it's just opening up an incredible can of worms. And, you know, I look around my neighborhood, there's a building right near me on 10th Avenue that was completed in 2015. It takes up, it's a luxury condo building. It takes up almost a quarter of a city block, and its first floor space has never been rented out. I suspect that the people who live there don't care that it's not a source of income for them because they're so rich that they don't need to defray their building's operating costs. And they'd rather have it just exist as a kind of a moat for their luxury building. By virtue of its being taken up that way, other small shops in the neighborhood have to pay higher rents. You know, the entire first floor of spaces along avenues should be open for businesses. And there was talk at one time in the past about introducing a tax on empty commercial space. Is that part of this, or could you address that at all?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last question, please? I didn't quite catch that.
It's an idea that's been floated in the past of introducing a tax on empty commercial space. How about that idea? Can you address that, or whether that's on the mayor's dashboard at all?
It is not as part of this proposal, no.
You know, I'll give you a couple of examples of people I know with small businesses. One of them had a bike shop on the basement level of a tenement, and clean business. He was in the neighborhood for ages, you know, very popular business. And his landlord started getting violations because the business was located, I think, less than 100 feet from an avenue that was on a side street. And eventually, he closed up shop. That's a case where I could see relaxing rules could make a big difference without any negative impact. I know someone else who has a very small bookshop in Chelsea whose rent just got doubled. You know, it's a nice business to have in the neighborhood, very clean. It has, you know, it's not another smoke shop, but, you know, he's going to have to move on. And in part, that's because of this 15% of retail space that sits there empty, sometimes for 8 years, like the example that I gave. It seems to me that if you really want to encourage small businesses, the thing first to do is to attack these huge spaces that are just kept off the market and that artificially inflates rents for everyone else. So I think my main takeaway is, you know, more homework and look at the way buildings really function and try to deal with the ridiculous warehousing of commercial and retail space that we already have. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. Actually, do you mind if I quickly address some of the comments about the light production uses? Just to cover, we have been working closely with both DEP and DOB on these proposals, and the uses permitted is really a subset of those uses that are not as hazardous. They would be limited in size on the commercial streets, and also would be subject to both the right to know and ABC rules, which would prohibit toxic or hazardous activities from happening. So it's not that we're opening the doors to all kinds of noxious manufacturing, but really those things that can happen on a small scale and in a clean way. But thank you for your comments, and we'll certainly continue to look more closely at this proposal.
Yeah, just one more thought. When you do have business like in a residential building, it changes the nature of the traffic that's coming and going into the building. Probably in a way that residents really wouldn't appreciate.
Thank you, David. Joe, go.
Sure. Hey, Andy, Joe Verstuccia. First, I ask that you never come to a community board meeting again without sending us all this information in advance. I mean, the fact that you're doing this very complex proposal and it's a lot of presentation, send it in advance. That's what we expect. That's what we always deal with. And it's not actually really useful for someone to come and speak all this information without us being able to get informed in advance to ask you informed questions. The second thing is general. I would ask that going forward, we all we're sitting here in a room outside of our homes. We ask that you would come and meet with us and talk to us. Because human beings in the room get through discussions much faster and easier than this I'm looking at a screen again that I've done for the past almost 3 years. And please, I bring this, and I ask you to bring this right up to Dan to say, we'd like to talk to people about issues. Tell us in advance full information so we can get informed questions and then talk to people directly. I'd like to ask first, could somebody please respond to the comments that Frank Halazubiak made about the conflicts that we know exist when these uses are side by side, specifically the issue of the ticketed ones. We, in our community board, have an incredible number of nightlife and bars, and we understand what this is. I, in fact, own a building adjacent to a venue that had ticketed events, and there would be 500 people that would show up and disturb the absolute residential ability of people to live there. Could you speak to that specifically, why that change, or you haven't looked at the specific ramifications of that change, and I have a bunch of questions for you.
Sure. I mean, specifically on the question about ticketed events, we'd expect that the capacity, the 200-person capacity, which is it sounds like a lot, but it's actually a relatively small establishment, that would not, attract large crowds. But however, we're hearing the feedback we're hearing.
Yeah. We want to let you know they do and they have.
Okay.
So, and you need to, I feel like there's a discussion happening outside of on the street experience. I mean, Frank speaks from years on a committee that has consistently reviewed and engaged liquor licenses, and we are very back and forth figuring out how to make them work. But we've learned from our experience, the ticketed events, people will show up, or there might be a notice put out that this ticket event, you can wait, like there's a whole thing that happens, like flyers get put out even though it's tickets, and a crowd appears. I think you need to reconsider and manage this, because I don't think this is a part I don't think you've experienced. Andy, any thoughts?
Joe, what specific change are you referring to?
The allowing the ticketed events to happen for a capacity of 200 people. And in a district like ours, in a district like many parts across the city, with many smaller buildings, 200 people is a lot.
It's both the ticketed events and the timed shows.
Right, the timed shows.
Because that's what really changes the dynamic on the streetscape and for surrounding residential buildings. Because the crowds of people congregate before going in and on the way out in a way they don't if it is a regular bar or restaurant with sort of ordinary course business.
Understood. And I think, our proposal to really focus on the size of the venue and 200 people is pretty much a standard sort of regular size lot, regular size venue, is really more about creating consistency and making enforcement easier and simpler for the rules to enforce. Whereas today, restaurants, business owners, members of the public, even DOB don't really sometimes understand what the rules actually are. And by creating a more consistent, easy to understand framework, we think that it would actually make that enforcement sort of easier to happen. And we think that by simplifying the zoning, we would actually be, freeing up time and resources on DOB's end, on DEP's end, to actually look into and start enforcing the regulations that are already on the books. When it comes to nightlife, sort of generally, and the concerns that you all have expressed, and those are completely valid, and there are those bad actors out there. In our experience, it's really not so much about the zoning or the rules that are on the books. It's more about enforcement. And for bad actors, the zoning is not necessarily going to deter them. Most of the time, if they're breaking the rules, they're doing it willfully, or they're deciding to, sort of ignore those noxious negative spillover effects that are occurring in their neighborhood and affecting you as neighbors. So, in our perspective, it's not the zoning that's really the problem itself, it's enforcement. And in our view, simplifying the zoning will make enforcement easier to do.
Right, but there is not enforcement, and we all live in the city of New York today. There hasn't been enforcement on this for decades. So Andy, one of the things we're trying to bring to your attention are some tweaks that may make the enforcement easier and not create unintended consequences. The next item I want to talk about is the mixture of residential and commercial uses. So our board dealt with the building on West 57th Street, 58th Street, between 8th and 9th Avenues, where some, like a white brick apartment building, upper floors, floors 2 and 3 were converted to commercial use. We dealt with this for 2.5 years because you're making no distinction. You're saying there's a separation. It is very difficult in existing buildings to make a separation. So that conflict was bringing a whole population coming out of a building and elevators and people going to residential floors. That's one issue. Second one is the idea that we would permit commercial use above residential use, and that commercial use could easily create a conflict for residents. I echo Frank's issue here. I believe in mixed-use neighborhoods 100%, and that's what we have along the west side. However, this is completely inviting residential conflict. To have residential above or on the same floor. Would you want to live in a building where someone is running a business on your same floor And even though it's said to be separated and there's no enforcement from DOP or no enforcement from DEP, and you live with it, I don't think you'd want to live in that building. And you're inviting this as a possibility across the city. We live in dense multifamily buildings, most of us. How is this something that is a great, why is this a great idea? What is the thing that we desperately need to do this because we can't survive as a city otherwise? Can you please give us some response and thought about that?
Yeah, we actually don't expect this to be widely used. The separation of uses, and there's actually requirements for like sound attenuation and dealing with vibrations for certain uses that might be above or adjacent to residential uses, are a high bar. It's pretty hard to retrofit a building to do this, so it would probably be primarily in new construction.
Where do those regulations live? Where do those regulations live that will be applied to retrofitting?
I mean, I can get back to you on that. I don't off the top of my head know the section of the zoning resolution, but I can certainly get back to you on that.
And you would implement them? In other words, you would implement them as part of this change?
It could apply to an existing building or to a new building, but the separation of uses and the sound attenuation for certain uses would apply regardless of whether it's an existing building or a new building.
All right.
Joe, before you move on, can I ask a follow-up? Please. Jennifer, you mentioned sound attenuation, but Joe asked and used an example of access, right? Elevator access to commercial space versus elevator access to residential space. Customers roaming the hallways of residential areas. So when you talk about separation, you talk about access separation as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'd have to have separate elevators. You could not, yes, it would be a security issue to have people, customers roaming residential.
Right, 57th Street, they didn't have separate elevators. Okay.
I don't know the specifics of that building. It does not sound like that's a building you could construct under the rules we're proposing, but if you can send us details on that, we're happy to take a look and compare it to our rules and see. Hopefully this fixes a problem that may exist. But if you send some information, we can certainly take a closer look at that.
I would just request you focus on the retrofitting question, because that's where people's right to have peace and quiet enjoyment in their homes is going to be affected. And it doesn't matter that you have the good actors and the bad actors. All of a sudden, you live in a building, and now part of the floor that you live on is a commercial space. Let's sort of segue into the idea of increasing from 25% to 49% for commercial use in your home. You know, David did speak to it, 1916. It's piecework. In the name of artisanal pickles, right? We're going to now allow 49% of an apartment to be used for some sort of commercial use. I've got to tell you that this is a huge issue that people are not going to want the guy who delivers the flour to the person baking at home to come to their apartment house. They're not going to want people coming in and picking up pies and fresh baked cookies, they don't know who the hell they are, on that floor. These are the kinds of things that you're going to get a response to. And I think your intent makes sense. But when you go to 49%, why bother to have a zoning resolution that is residential or commercial? I mean, we separate this for a reason, because we live in our homes.
Joe, what if the community board meeting at your house?
Exactly. I don't want to go through the hallway and walk through and find people I don't know coming to pick up things that somebody is making. An example we have in our neighborhood, once somebody was a weaver and had a loom that drove everybody crazy, tunk, 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 in old buildings. So you now say that there's no remedy in zoning that an owner or the city can say that business is creating and disturbing against people's right to live there. You know, we had a CrossFit gym in Chelsea that the vibrations on the ground floor went to the 7th floor in a building. I mean, we live cheek by jowl in the city, and I think you got the right ideas. I think the execution has got to be a little more thoughtful because we're living so close to each other. Thoughts, either Jennifer or Andy on this?
I mean, Joe, I think your points are well taken. I will say specifically to the removing the 25% or raising the 25% cap for home occupations and eliminating the floor area requirement. That was more to address sort of an inequity that was related to people who were living and working in smaller units like studios and smaller one bedrooms where they were bumping up against that rule. I think, you know, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the actual universe of uses that would be sort of contained within this list of home occupations is significantly smaller than what is permitted under the typical sort of what we could consider like the usual use group 6 uses. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Andy. And currently the rules for home occupation prohibit anything that it provides disturbances or creates issues with neighbors, and those rules would remain. We don't. A home occupation is really intended to be, you know, it's primarily home, but many people who sort of recognize work out of their homes, and you could. Individual buildings could continue through their condo or co-op rules, or through their lease agreements could further restrict home occupations. I mean, that's permitted today would continue to be permitted through those agreements. So in addition to the zoning, there's additional things that can happen on a building by building basis.
So a rent-stabilized building could restrict home occupations through its lease, and the tenant could not say, no, I can do this as of right?
I believe so, yeah.
Can we get some sort of response on that that's, you know, clear?
Yeah.
What about micro delivery? We all understand that. Do you prohibit e-bikes in these micro delivery locations?
Sorry, Joe, can you say that again?
Are you going to prohibit e-bikes in these micro delivery locations? It makes sense again, the e-bikes are dangerous. We have huge issues in buildings all the time with this.
Jen, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, we're aware of a lot of the concerns and challenges around the electric bikes. And I think, I believe that both DOT and the NYPD are looking into ways that they can better regulate them. We aren't currently proposing through zoning any particular limitations on the types of operation of the bicycles that might be used in micro distribution facilities. What we are seeing now is that they're on the sidewalks and in the streets, in clogging up, you know, creating issues on the sidewalks through deliveries that are happening, not in. So the idea is to get some of this off the street and into a building so that it's not creating so many conflicts, but on a small scale.
I gotta say again, I would like to say up front, if you have other agencies seeking to prohibit e-bikes in residential buildings, you need to do the same. To say that there's gonna be enforcement, do not allow that particular item in a micro delivery location. Of course it makes sense to bring the other stuff inside, perfect. But you wanna create a hazard? No, you don't. And I would like everyone, as we're trying to give comments here, to hear the comments so you can understand that this is part of the public process, that not everything may have been thought about when you get your overarching stuff makes a lot of sense, right? But it's the details, that is the execution, that we have to live with. And we're trying to give you things that we know are problems to live with. So please hear us. Last part, one thing on Andy, on the maps that are incorrect, this issue about the 2-year discontinuance, we have a provision 96-106 in the special zoning district. It doesn't apply. So it's not like we're getting a benefit. That already, if a store is empty, you can still rent it and use it for commercial space. We instituted that in 1973. So we were thinking about this issue to make sure there's a ground floor commercial uses. I just feel like, and then the last
We keep borrowing your ideas, Joe.
Yeah, I understand, but then fix your map. So borrow well, but fix the map. Just a quick question for you. The C2 district, you mentioned, that allows the commercial on the second floor, you're conforming that, you're changing that C1 to have the same possibility. However, on the maps you show that were in our districts that wouldn't apply, we have commercial overlays. So that means, if I'm correct, if I'm incorrect, please correct me, that 9th Avenue C15 will go to C25, it would will allow second floor use. We have a problem, that means it's a pressure on converting residential apartments to commercial use, introducing commercial use to the second floor. And our buildings are mostly walk-ups and school buildings, and that creates another conflict. So if what you're saying is the residential zone takes precedence over the overlay, the commercial overlay, that's fine. But if you're making them across the city, we have to put something in our special zoning district regulations that do not permit introduction of commercial use above the second floor. You see the nuance there? Trying to get it?
We do, and it's something that other stakeholders have raised as a potential pressure on residential. We see this more as creating, greater flexibility, as you know, Joe, renting commercial space above the ground floor, particularly for retail, is often really challenging. So we don't necessarily think that commercial space above the ground floor will outcompete residential. We think in most cases residential will win out, but we want to really prepare for and allow for those sorts of edge cases where there is a business that does want to expand, that does exist on the ground floor, and there is an opportunity for them to do that without having to go through an onerous process, or for them to have to move or not expand at all. We're really doing this, I think, in a lot of ways to sort of, try to help at the margins, not necessarily try to create, avenues or commercial corridors where there's like 9th Avenue, like you pointed out, where there's commercial on the second floor throughout. It's mostly about allowing for flexibility at the margins.
So I just want to note, as a resident of the city of New York, this city of New York proposal, I vote no on this item, particularly because honestly, you are going to create an additional pressure to displace residential units and individuals and people who live there. I am speaking as a resident, not necessarily only business. I understand the intent of this proposal, but you come to communities to hear concerns because, in fact, what you want to do on the margins is going to have an impact on people's lives. So let's, as we engage with this, really think about not everywhere in the same way, because it has an impact that is different. Citywide zoning text amendments are good. However, they will have unintended consequences, and we are here to protect people who live in our district, not just to see a business that wants to expand at some point. Seriously. I mean, this is not, I don't know, I live in a city that cares about people first and not just business first. It's a balance always. That's what we do every day, balance. So can you please take this back to your folks, that this is something that I think you're going to get a lot of pushback around, this sort of second floor use that could create an impact on residential uses and tenants. I have not exhausted, but I'm just exhausted.
But fortunately, we have more time to add comments, so we'll get there. JD, anything?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. Some allergies, so I can speak well, but is the intent to drive residents out of the city? Is that your intent? I ask that question because you said you met with business people and nightlife people. Did you meet with residents, or is this the meeting with residents? That's a question. Did you? I guess.
So the answer to your first question is no. Our intent is not to drive out residents. And to your second question, we've been engaging with a lot of stakeholders. For this particular City of Yes initiative, it's been mostly focused on business owners, but you're all residents. This is, of course, the opportunity for you to weigh in.
Okay, thank you. So this is the opportunity, and yet we have to respond by January, is that it?
Yes.
This is not enough time. This is not enough outreach. My last two questions. Have you considered the fact that both Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen are made up of a lot of small residential 5-story buildings? Have you calculated that? And if so, is there a flexibility in your proposals? Many good proposals, but is there a flexibility according to the neighborhood? And my last question is, how many DEP inspectors are you proposing to have? I think there are 4 now in the entire city. Are you proposing that we have more enforcement? You talk about enforcement, that's great. How many inspectors do we have now? DEP for noise. How many? No answer?
I'm not aware of that number, no.
Yeah, we actually do have 4, Andy. It's kind of bizarre.
So that's the entire city. So all your proposals, everything's going to be wonderful, hunky-dory, yeah, but there's not going to be enforcement. So I applaud a lot of your proposals. Let's help small business, terrific. But let's not drive out my neighbors in Hell's Kitchen and Chelsea.
JD, can you help me understand a little bit about your first question about flexibility related to the building typologies that are found in the neighborhoods?
Sorry, not clear. This is an overall proposal. It might work in
Brownsville?
Brownsville, thank you, Chris. It might work great in Brownsville. It might not work in Chelsea, in the historic district of Chelsea. So is there some flexibility that you can apply? Or is this overarching?
I mean, it would apply across the city, but I would have to know more about sort of like what specific proposal you would think we would need more flexibility on.
I think part of it is we're trying to even understand the details of what you're proposing, so then we can respond with nuance. And we are the master of nuanced letters, right, all the time. So we want to get you nuances, but if we don't understand it, it's hard to give you the details back that can make the flexibility and make things work. That's all.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really want to emphasize, or echo Frank's comments, but to add, I would say, and I guess it's picking up a little bit of what JD is saying here, when we reflected on the first City of Yes proposal, we said specifically that, which was that it was too broad a brush. And I think that same language could be applied here, that our city is incredibly vast and on it, like personally, maybe distinct from what you're hearing here, like the city ranks, I think, last or second to last in every study of zoning laws and regulations. And so I think there's a real value in improving it and streamlining it for the purpose of economic growth and development, not at the cost of residents. But I do think there's real value in this exercise. But it does seem that it is just, our district has very unique specifications and concerns. And any citywide proposal doesn't seem to be taking that into consideration. And so I even would expect that for the next City of Yes proposal, which we know there'll be a third, we might hear similar comments, which is that a more, neighborhood-based or district-based approach needs to be allowed for. So it's not really a question, but that is a comment. I'm concerned with your comment about enforcement, that the rationale for this is to free up time so that enforcement will be clearer when we're hearing that enforcement already doesn't really happen. There's not real support for that. And in fact, these complexities will only require more enforcement. And I had one other thing, which is escaping me. So thank you.
Brad?
Yeah, I was picking up on the micro deliveries. My question is, I own a delivery company. Why am I paying rent if the city's not making me go in there? Because I just park on the street, I get a parking ticket, I got 20 guys show up, they pick everything out of the truck, they leave. So I'm trying to understand, I think it's a good idea. I know Gail Brewer brought it up, she's pushing for it. I think it's a good idea. I like your ideas not to black out the storefront, but how do you get them in there? And unless you fine them a lot for being on the street, not just a parking ticket, but really whack them, they're not going in. So I like the idea. That's my specific question. And a lot of these incentives you guys are talking about, I know this is zoning, but what is the economic development portion of this to give people loans to help subsidize rents, to open up that corridor of business, not just with the zoning change? So I'm just wondering if there's a component of that related with this. Thank you.
Chris.
Thanks.
Yes. Oh, sorry. And did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll just respond quickly to the one comment about deliveries or micro distribution. The proposal is only looking to allow those at a very small scale in neighborhood commercial corridors, and C1s and C2s, they would be limited to 2,500 square feet and then 5,000 square feet in your more high density commercial districts. And we think that, those are really the size that's appropriate for more of your smaller delivery vehicles, like bikes, even sort of on foot delivery people, and your smaller vehicles. And so our hope behind that is that, by creating these more distributed network of smaller stores, that you would have less truck traffic, less people or fewer people or trucks or delivery people double parking or illegally parking on the street or parking on the curb or creating hazardous conditions or things like that. And then to your second question or comment about incentives and the economic development component of this, this package is not related to any sort of set of, programmatic or incentives related to providing commercial rent relief or giving grants to small businesses or things like that, but that it is something that other departments or sister agencies like Economic Development Corporation are always sort of actively pursuing and trying to create targeted programs to help businesses thrive and survive.
Andy, for example, I grew up in Chicago. Mayor Daley said, we've got all these entities and I'm fixing a light, and then I'm going 5 blocks away. Then I'm doing the sidewalk 3 years later. Then I'm doing the sewer. Then I'm putting trees in. What he did was he got all the agencies in one room and said, we're going block by block, right? So I don't know why when you guys are doing a zoning change for business that they're not sitting in the room with you going, okay, we're gonna open up storefronts and this is how we're gonna help get people in it. To help the landlords, to help the businesses. Doesn't make any sense just put it abstractly out there. I think it's poor leadership. I'm just gonna say that. I mean, it's just really poor how it should be really thought out. And I asked it specifically about what are you going to do to get them in the micro unit delivery places? I understand you could say to UPS, get in there, we're gonna put all the boxes there, then they're going on bikes. But Amazon and the rest of them, there's no incentive to do it. Zero. And not only that, the city allows them to take their tickets and reduce them down to 10%. So they're not even paying, it's part of doing business that we pay for. So there's no incentive to do this. This is what I'm talking about, the groups need to get in one room and have a real plan. We're telling them to rent the space, well, how do we get them to do it? And there just seems to be, let's just open up the door and see what happens. I don't think the leadership is there, and I think the mayor needs to get it together a little bit.
Thanks, Brad. Bruce?
Thank you. So I have severe concerns about residential quality of life with the proposals. From my personal experience, having had apartments turned into businesses and people coming in at all hours of the day, decreasing security and putting a high stress health-wise and mental health-wise on residents. I had a sex club in my apartment building. I had a fitness gym in a studio apartment that ended up having access to the backyard and was throwing client parties in the backyard there. I've had apartments used as hotels, and now you're proposing a business-owned live-work scenario in residential buildings. Aside from what Joe and JD and everyone else in this committee has already highlighted, now you're telling us that LLCs have the opportunity once again to rent apartments and put workers in those apartments. I have concerns about labor rights when something like this is proposed. And, I've seen a lot of the base of this work when I worked in the 41st Council District, when I worked in Brownsville and Ocean Hill, and I was privy to the East New York plan and the Brownsville plan and the Flatlands plan. But Central Brooklyn and Flatlands is very different from the west side of Manhattan. The one thing about truths that I hate is that they're always going to be truths. I just read Jane Jacobs again on Monday, and she captures the west side so perfectly when she talks about the deindustrialization of Chelsea. And what ended up happening, I've lived in Hell's Kitchen for most of my life. I went to school in St. Louis, Missouri, and I saw what urban decay looks like. And what happened when you deindustrialized Chelsea, you put a stress on all our storefronts in the 8th, 9th, and 10th Avenue corridor. And now we have a very anemic neighborhood economy that's based almost completely on hospitality. We've lost services in laundromats. We've lost dry cleaners. We don't have a fucking bookstore, excuse my language. Okay? So no, we're talking about a need for diversity of business. It does not start in our apartments. It starts with logical approaches to getting our buildings, commercial spaces on the 9th Avenue corridor and 10th Avenue corridor rented out. And by putting micromobility or highlighting micromobility and potential for charging bikes in our residential spaces, in those commercial spaces, I'd like to highlight a burnt out building on 9th Avenue between 51st and 52nd Street that is still devoid of family and residents, okay?
764 9th Avenue.
Thank you, Joe. So please, I know you come at looking for a win and that you come with a full heart, but the nuances of what happens in this community is something that echoes everywhere. So if you want fires in Hell's Kitchen, the same way you do have fires in South Bronx and in Elmhurst and in Brooklyn and in Chinatown, by all means, implement this without any of our say. Okay? Without any restrictions, without any logic or context. Please, you have to push back on this January deadline. It's insufficient. And in fact, this January deadline may incentivize me to go fly to San Juan tomorrow in Somos to advocate on behalf of my tenant association, because this does not make sense. I'd rather lose $3,500 in a flight than lose my neighborhood.
Greg?
I have heard this is the second time I've heard this presentation. And actually just, I do have a question, but I do want to make a comment. So the second time I've heard this. I was sitting in a forum this morning focused on economic development in the city, the concerns about the future tax base of the city, the desire or the interest to try to create more work and live spaces in New York City, and the complexities of doing that given the existing zoning. I think that my question, everything here is valid, and I've heard this before, so I won't take up too much time. My question really to the presenters, how on earth are you going to take the information that's shared just during the course of this and multiply that by the number of different community boards, right? And actually do something that I think the city sometimes struggles to do, which is take the feedback, process the feedback, and come back to the table in some way that perhaps leads to a constructive next step. So my question is this. So I sorry if I'm a little all over. It's late in the day, and I will be at Somos tomorrow. So we'll see what happens there. But I think the point of all this is to say we've got serious problems in this city in terms of zoning.
I've heard multiple times during the course of this conversation tonight, some support for elements of what you're putting on the table. I've also heard serious pushback and or reflection. You're going to get that from 59 other boards. So now what happens exactly? Is this a circumstance where there is going to be a next iteration? Or is this a circumstance where this is what is going to be dealt with when the council has to take it on? Like, what happens now exactly? Because the reality of this is you're trying to do something for the entire city, and all 59 of those districts, all 59 of those boards are going to have nuance. So just help me understand where you go from here exactly.
Thanks for that question. And, you know, the short answer is it's a lot of work. You know, even with individual ULURP applications that are site specific, that are in one community board, you know, we do take the feedback from the community board. We do present it to the commission. The commission does read it, and they do take that into consideration when they make their decision ultimately. And you just take that and you compound it 59 times, and that's just the work that we have to do. We take the feedback from all 59 community boards, we synthesize it, we present it to the commission in, you know, a several hundred-page document, and they actually do read it. They get paid to read it, and they, you know, use that to inform their decision.
Thank you. Yeah, but why, Andy, did you try to get the information in advance? The point of it is, the iterative process actually makes proposals better, and it makes them function. So is 60 days for a citywide major overhaul, how all commercial uses are treated, sufficient for the unpaid members of community boards to respond and to engage with our council members and with you, help move things along toward a successful end? I think what our prior member just asked is, are we going to just have this happen and then it's all going to get sliced and diced at city council? Not a very efficient way of making systemic change. Sure.
Joe, points well taken, and we understand that. You know, I think we heard largely sort of the same comments during carbon neutrality referral. And we did take that feedback. And I think that's why we, for this proposal, you know, prepared, you know, had more pre-referral engagement, many more info sessions. That's why we released the draft text almost a month ahead of referral. So we are listening to you. I understand that, you know, 60 days is not a long time, but it's unfortunately sort of like the legal framework that we have to operate under, and we're trying to create flexibility where we can and try and get that information out to the public when we can.
You just agree that before the next City of Yes proposal, that the documents that we got today would come maybe 2 months in advance with the details and information and presentation, so we can kind of digest them and understand them. That's probably going to be the most controversial one, right?
Right. I expect it will be. You know, as you know, there's typically a lag between when the commission formally refers something and when you receive the full package of materials. Unfortunately, just the way that the timing worked, this meeting bumped up right up against that very day. So unfortunately, you weren't able to receive formally that full package, even though the materials were on Zap. But I hear you, Joe.
We can get them informally. We're fine with that. Yep. Rodney?
Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah. On that too, I'd like to add, we did email out, I think, sort of in advance as many resources as we could to all of the community boards. And if that didn't get your hands, or if we could do a better job at that, we're always looking at ways to try to get materials to you sooner if we can. We may not always have all of the details really early, but if we can do a better job, we can certainly try to do that, and we'll work with management and leadership at the community boards to make sure we're getting those materials to you in time.
Appreciate that, especially given the next one on housing. I think we'll probably have a lot to say on that one. Rodney, go ahead.
Sure. Again, thank you for the presentation. In addition to the Chelsea Land Use Committee, I'm also on the Cannabis Task Force, and I won't belabor the point because I think the other committee members have made it clear. My concern is the quality of life for the residents, and I also heard 10th Avenue a lot. I live along 10th Avenue, so my comment is just I'm concerned about that.
Thank you. Carrie, Carrie, there you are. Carrie, you got your hand up?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation. I will try not to be redundant, and Paul and JD and Jessica, I will send everybody my full notes, which are a bit of a mess. But for the second time, what's that?
Said you were saying thank you.
Yeah. For the second time, I'm concerned with the broad nature of the zoning changes proposal, and with words like businesses like and potentially and some sort, and it probably won't happen, but we're going to make a bunch of laws around it happening if it does. So just to echo everyone who said that this sort of broad stroke idea of how to get things done does not really sit well, I think, with probably all of the community boards. But I'll try to get into some specifics, and again, my notes are a bit of a mess, but let me ask you, and I'm also sort of asking Frank at the same time, if Prop 9 nightlife, 200 people, which I've heard is not a lot of people in a potentially residential building. Sorry to be personal, but I think of my wedding, which got shut down and it was less than 200 people. There's amplified sound. That's a big deal. So I guess what I'm asking is, if this becomes a law, what actually can BLP, for example, do with their stipulations to protect against it? Because we've heard so many times from so many lawyers that, sorry, that's the law. So you kind of set up protections in place, but I'm not sure there are actual protections in place. So that's a question. I don't know if Frank can maybe help me answer it because he's so knowledgeable on the topic, or I can just put it forward as a question.
Let me just answer that quickly. The reason zoning is so important is it's sort of a cut and dry, hard and fast rule. You can do this, you cannot do that. And, except for the really bad actors, no one tries to push against it. Our stipulations have to be agreed to by the applicant for they to have any force. We can't impose anything on an applicant, so they have to agree. If the law allows them to do certain things, have dancing or live music or show times, it is highly unlikely they will agree to our persuasion that this is a bad idea, because they will say, look, the law allows it, our competitors are doing this, you can't put us at a competitive disadvantage. So zoning sort of levels the playing field and tells everyone, you can't do this, you can't ask for it, next. And that's what's going to really change.
So just to clarify my concern in that regard, you use BLP as a protection against, and we won't really be able to protect against, according to what I just heard.
Yeah,
we can try.
We can try to work with people, but it doesn't. Yeah. We don't have the authority of law to say you cannot do A, B, C, and D. We can point to zoning that says you can't do that, and most people will back up, but that protection will be gone.
Right. sorry, Prop 10, you mentioned amusements. Again, it's like this sort of broad stroke that I would love for more definition around businesses, what is amusements? Does that include casinos? Because I'm curious, as we all know, there are, ideas floating around casinos. So is an amusement a casino? I'll put these out there. Maybe you can answer them now or later, but
I will just answer that. It is not.
Sure. Okay,
There's
great.
nothing. Yeah, there was, and I know initially there was some talk of including casinos in this proposal. It is not is no longer part of this proposal and would be subject to a state licensing process.
Okay,
still.
thanks.
Yeah.
For Prop 12, Paul, JD, Jessica, I really think we should talk to Transportation Committee about, some of the things went by so fast that I didn't quite understand them all, but if we're talking about cutouts and streetscape, like, I think we're gonna want to hear what they have to say. We might want to put that, in our letter. Prop 15, NYCHA, like, again, it went by so fast that I don't really understand what was proposed there, but obviously you probably know that we are in the middle of a very important proposal to, rebuild the NYCHA campuses. So I would really like to understand more about that. Prop 17, you said like maybe a film studio case by case zoning, discretionary zoning to change height and setback. That's a pretty big deal for Chelsea. So can you maybe elaborate on that? Like if you're going to change height and setback in Chelsea, like that's going to be something that we need to know a lot more about.
Yeah, so this particular proposal has come up in the context of soundstage construction, where and it's kind of less relevant, honestly, in large parts of Manhattan. It's more relevant in other manufacturing zones in the city where we have rules in manufacturing zones that basically require weird setbacks and don't let you. So a soundstage really needs to be a box, and it's really inefficient to build otherwise. And there really isn't a pathway besides some sort of major rezoning, which introduces use changes and a whole sort of broad set of other sort of new provisions that are unnecessary. So this would be an authorization. So it would be subject to City Planning Commission review and approval, to allow for more flexibility for building those types of buildings. Probably less relevant, honestly, in Community Board 4, but that's where it would apply. I hope that.
But potentially affecting Community Board 4.
It could. We see it as less likely to be used here. Pardon me?
They're building one on the water. That's what I'm
talking
about.
Yeah, and they may not need any relief there. And if they did, they would have to go through a discretionary process to get any relief.
So can we get some
clarity?
More guidelines around what is what exactly? New zoning, Prop 18, new zoning for future rezoning. That was just my note to myself because again, it went by so fast. That's what I wrote down. New zoning for future rezoning, question mark. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'll try and take as many of those as I can. So the proposition or proposal 18 was really about creating new types of mostly manufacturing zoning districts that today really aren't allowed. So our existing manufacturing districts create sort of a lot of times we found unworkable building envelopes that don't mirror a lot of the loft type buildings that we see in particularly Manhattan, like in Midtown and Hell's Kitchen and Chelsea. So what we want to do is we want to create those new types of zoning districts that are really just tools that in the future can be mapped through another ULURP action. So this proposal would not be mapping those new zoning districts. It would just be creating that tool that in the future another applicant can come take that zoning district off the shelf and apply it if they so chose. And just to give you sort of a real world CB4 example of this, as you know, we're pursuing the Midtown South mixed use rezoning, a very small part of which is in CB4, but and as part of that proposal, we are looking at these new zoning districts to potentially map in those areas, potentially pairing them with like an R district to create a mixed use district. So that's just one example of the way we would be sort of applying this new tool potentially. To your other question about NYCHA campuses, that's specifically about sort of areas of the city that are exclusively zoned are residential districts that don't have like a commercial overlay, but have, you know, really dense concentrations of people like NYCHA campuses, but because they don't allow commercial, they don't allow some community facilities, the people living in those campuses have to, you know, travel to go get their basic needs. So proposal 17 would allow for sort of those smaller sort of bodegas, corner stores, more your everyday needs to be located in residence districts, but through a discretionary approval process that would be, you know, informed by community board input and would also be subject to seeker environmental review as well. And then your other question about
Can I just interrupt you on the
Sure.
NYCHA? Wouldn't that be something that's part of the ULURP that we're potentially going through in the next few months? As opposed to a citywide text amendment? I guess that's my concern, is that there's this broad sweep about, you know, we will make this, you know, change law that will allow this to happen without really getting into the actual neighborhood and whether it's appropriate for that neighborhood. Not saying that it is or it isn't in ours, but I guess that's my question.
Right. Do you mean the Elliott, Chelsea, and Fulton houses specifically?
I mean, actually not specifically, like that you're proposing a full citywide text amendment for something that might or might not be appropriate for a particular neighborhood.
Right. I think with the proposal that you're looking at today, it's simply creating a pathway for something to happen. It wouldn't necessarily allow for the type of, or I know for a fact that it wouldn't allow the type of sort of large scale wholesale redevelopment that, you know, Fulton and Elliott, Chelsea need.
But doesn't the ULURP process allow for that change versus a citywide text amendment?
Well, today there is no mechanism, there is no pathway to allow for, you know, like small scale commercial on NYCHA campuses that are in our districts. So this is just making that option possible. And then in the future, through another ULURP action, that new commercial use could be introduced. It's more about creating the tools and then in later applications being able to apply those tools. Because right now, what we're seeing throughout the city is that these businesses or NYCHA campuses or property owners, they don't even have the tools or the pathways to be able to, you know, make changes or ask for some sort of relief. That option doesn't even exist in the zoning. So what we're doing is just simply creating that pathway, if that makes sense. I hope I was somewhat clear.
Just to echo JD, again, like you keep mentioning enforcement. Does the budget provide for more DOB staff to actually enforce?
this proposal is not creating more enforcement mechanisms or.
I'm almost done. Sorry, these are my quick notes. I just wonder about businesses mixed with residential and signage. Like, let's say that you're putting up a business on the fourth floor of what used to be a residential building, and I live across the street. Am I going to have a neon sign in my window? Do you have any rules against that?
Yes. So for home occupations, you would not be allowed to advertise, have a sign in your window.
Okay. And my last question is regarding if you are a landlord of a rent-controlled unit or building, can you just decide that you want to turn it into a business and therefore those apartments are lost?
I mean, this wouldn't change any of the existing rent stabilization laws, so the answer is no. Not through any other pathway than that would exist today. I mean, it's the same process to change the use or to get a different tenant in the unit. Yeah, I mean, we're not affecting those laws at all. It would remain in place.
Yeah, can I just try to rephrase that? I own a rent stabilized building. A tenant is running a home business and they are creating lots of problems for all of their neighbors. We bring them to court because they're creating a home business, right? And one of the things they say is, it says in the zoning, I can do this. And I can have people coming and going. This is the kind of thing you need to think about on the ground, real, live effect. You have your neighbors, you're disturbing them, and a judge says, well, the city zoning code says 49% of this is fine. And there is no series of violations because there's 4 DEP inspectors citywide. To understand the nature of what we're trying to get to. It's not about rent stabilization laws going away, not the question I was asked. It's how does it impact as an unintended consequence? I know you can answer this the second, but I believe you've heard us over and over on this general theme that it just sounds like a very pat answer a lot. So please help us get through something and get to the other side of it.
Gary, you good?
Thank you thanks for answering all the questions. Appreciate it.
Brian, and then I see Marty and Pam, and I think that we'll wrap there. Brian?
Thank you, Paul. Just first, I just want to note that the 60-day period coincides with 2 major holidays. We're volunteers. A lot of us travel to family during this time period. So not much of an opportunity to dig in at the level that this board would dig into. The second thing, and I think this goes back to what Joe was just saying, and a number of members of the board have said this, you're putting a disproportionate amount of the burden on enforcement, and you've also said hope a number of times. We would hope that this would do something. And we're telling you that in our community, we know how it functions. And there is too much room in here for unintended consequences. What's the expression, like water through stone? Just for example, unlicensed cannabis stores are illegal, yet I have one directly across the street from me. Digital signs and sandwich boards, digital sandwich boards are illegal, yet I have one across the street from me. And I have a sign hanging on the window, and that too is illegal. The Office of Cannabis Management has more agents than you do, 37. There is no way that they can enforce that. There is no way. Yeah. So statewide. Thank you for pointing that out. So the unintended consequences will happen. It's inevitable. And then everybody is left saying, well, why can't the police do anything about it? Why can't sanitation do anything about it? Because they're not enforceable laws. And that's part of the problem here. So what I would say is, let's use zoning to help us so we're not in that confrontational situation. What Joe is saying is perfectly reasonable. If I have a bakery on the second floor of a walk-up on 9th Avenue, and it's doing great business, and I have not just customers coming in, but deliveries coming in and out, from flour and whatever, all day long, how does that impact the residents that live here? How does that impact the guy who lives right across the hallway from this other individual? These are serious concerns, and these might be little holes in your overall sweeping plan. And again, I think you'd have a lot of support for this plan if we had time to go through and address what we perceive as unintended consequences. One last question I have is, there's been very little discussion about this, but agriculture. Agriculture sounds like a novel idea in commercial and manufacturing zones, but it also presents huge water and electric consumption if you're doing it indoors. And it also presents huge sanitation issues and delivery issues. So how is that being navigated? And how is that going to be integrated into a community such as you pointed out the M1 zone that we're working with on the mixed Midtown South plan? I mean, it seems very reasonable that one of those vast store places could be a cannabis farm. And how are we going to deal with all of the unintended and ancillary activities that need to occur around that? And it's sort of like that all needs to be baked into this plan. So we're not after the fact trying to figure out how to clean up something that we didn't perceive as going to be an issue down the line. And I think that's a lot of the concern you're hearing from a lot of us on this conversation. So that just a comment. I don't know if you have an answer to that, but thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Marty, you're up.
Thank you. I have the opportunity to agree. I want to state that I'm agreeing. I haven't heard a statement made by any of the committee members with which I disagree. And that leads me to believe that they need answers. I don't see how you can go to a decision before you come back to the community boards, plural, without having incorporated these comments into whatever the zoning agreement is. I did not take the kind of notes that Carrie took, but I have highlighted 4 that I just want to reinforce. If you are writing a law that requires enforcement, you better provide for the enforcement. It's not good enough to say that's not our job. The micro mobility hubs have 2 issues. How are you going to open them? And how are you going to deal with fire safety from the bikes? If you don't include that in some way in your consideration of establishing micro mobility hubs, then you better rethink it. Having mixed buildings, if you don't take into consideration building vibrations and outsider intrusion, then you need to rethink it. And I just go back to my first statement. There's a lot more information that we require, and the 60-day period doesn't do it. If you cram it down our throats, you can do it in the 60-day period. But I don't think anybody on this board would appreciate your cramming it down our throats. You need more time to answer the questions that have gone around this table.
Thank you, Marty.
See, Mike's hands up, so I don't know.
Pam had her hand up and I can see her face.
Okay.
And I don't see Mike on, so I like that over. Pam, did you want to have anything to say, or are you good?
Carrie and a number of other members have asked the questions that I had and probably phrased them better than I would have. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Abby, you think you had a tough presenting all 18 in one long-winded presentation. We had 18 of us all talk to you individually. So I appreciate your stamina and hanging in there with us and listening to us. And I know that the 3 of you, Jennifer and Andy and Abby, you are very familiar with our board and know full well that we are very detail-oriented, want information, will give good feedback, and hope to be constructive in our commentary. And I hope that you took a lot from us tonight. And what I'm hearing overwhelmingly is unintended consequences and the impact on the residents of our city as we move forward on economic opportunity for businesses. So with that,
I just want to say that really appreciate everyone's constructive comments and feedback tonight, and just to say that the sooner we can get your list of questions and follow-up items, the sooner we can return with answers to those, hopefully by your next meeting. That'll be our intent. And then also, this, I'll just reiterate, this is technically a non-ULURP item. So even though we encourage you to get your recommendation in before that 60-day soft deadline, we can be flexible with that. And, the commission will be accepting your recommendations and comments up till the public hearing.
And if, did you infer that if we got all of our questions to you before our next meeting, you'd come back and answer our questions?
We will do our best.
We'd love to have you back.
You may not have the answer you want to hear, but
We don't care about
no,
that.
I didn't say that tongue in cheek. We'll do our best.
Can you repeat the date? Can you repeat the dates that you currently have calendared for the steps in this process?
We don't have a definite date for the public hearing, but Jen, I believe it's
approximate
January 9th, right?
For the commission hearing?
No. Commission hearing, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. I think will probably be more like February, mid-February. But it's not calendared yet, but I can get back to you with a more sort of specific time frame. But we don't have a specific date yet, but thinking of targeting.
And that timeline is flexible, right, Jennifer? Because it's not a ULURP item, right?
It's somewhat flexible. Yeah.
Well, I know what the mayor wants, but I'm saying there is flexibility in that date.
If anything, you can take away and take back to the mayor that there's at least one community board asking for more time. So, all right. As I said, the next step for this board and our committee work is that we will comprise a list of questions, commentary from this. Kerry, thank you for taking lots of notes. I have 5 pages of notes myself. So we'll present the information, get some responses from DCP, and then bring it back to the land use committees to kind of formulate a position. Right now, we're still in the gathering of information stage. All right, so there's no real formal motion tonight unless somebody has a motion to make.
Or can we send you questions?
You send me, JD, Jessica, and Kerry. Copy the 4 of us. If you have any notes or thoughts, anything you want to make sure is encapsulated, send it to the 4 of us. All right. And I would suggest that'd be very good to entertain a motion to adjourn. All right, let's go. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer and Abby and
Have a good night.
Appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Same.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.